Ooh, and we are back. Hey y'all, Boogie and I here. How's it going? And it's pretty safe to say I love a good atmospheric horror movie. I understand they're not for everybody, and I'm not going to hold it against you if you don't like the movie Suspiria. Although we will have to have a very serious conversation if one of your favorite movies is either Salò or Caligula. Now, speaking of Suspiria, let's talk about Dario Argento's 1971 breakout movie, The Cat O' Nine Tails. Now, I know what you're thinking right now. I can already hear it. My ears are burning. Oh my god, Boogie Night, you just spent an entire month talking about Giallo movies and your obsession with them. And you go on a 3-month hiatus, and what's the first movie you talk about? Not just another Giallo film, but another Argento film. Well, here's the thing. I wasn't even planning on doing this review. I was planning on recording something completely different, which I'm actually going to be recording and uploading this weekend. But Morges and I have been watching the Argento trilogy, the Animals trilogy. Started last week with Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and then last night we watched this movie, Cat O' Nine Tails, and next week we'll be following it up with the ending of the trilogy, which is Four Flies on Grey Velvet. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, before I start talking about this movie, if you're not too familiar with what the Giallo subgenre is, I'll put a link in the description below to my entry about Sonic Boogie Rambles About Movies, because that kind of talks about what a Giallo is and kind of how it fits into the overall horror spectrum. Anyway, so part of me was thinking about maybe doing a review last week of Bird with the Crystal Plumage, but neither Morges and I were terribly impressed with it. Which is saying, we didn't think it was bad per se, but that's saying a lot. Bird with the Crystal Plumage was actually Dario Argento's first directorial role. Now, he had done several screenplays and screenwritings, and he's been credited as a writer going back to the days of the 60s, but when he did Plumage, which was, I forget the time frame, I want to say it was sometime between 1968 and 1970, or 1969, sometime around that time frame, because obviously Cat O' Nine Tails came out shortly thereafter. But here's the thing. When your first Argento movie that you ever saw was back in the early 2000s, and it was Suspiria, it sets the bar in your expectations for the Giallo and the horror genre. And I don't think, with the exception of Josh Wasabi or Morges, I don't think I could watch any kind of Giallo film without them at the helm with me, because we know what the genre is about. We understand the different kind of directors. We understand the whole concept and makeup for it. But when Morges and I started watching Cat O' Nine Tails, he and I were both riveted from the get-go, to the point I actually told him halfway through it, I think I need to review this. I think it's time that I actually do another Argento review. So here's the burning question, since you kind of already know my backstory about Argento and Suspiria and everything like that. And, is it better than Suspiria? I can't say it's better than Suspiria. I can't say it's on par with Suspiria, and it's definitely not worse than Suspiria, because they're in it for two different reasons, and I'm going to kind of go into it. So you'll keep hearing me reference Suspiria throughout this review. It's kind of as a baseline. But Cat O' Nine Tails, particularly compared to Bird with the Crystal Plumage, if Bird with the Crystal Plumage is here, Cat O' Nine Tails is straight up here. And obviously I can't say that lightly, just because when a director is doing his first debut film, he's going to be limited on budget, which means he's going to be limited on his stable of actors and actresses. The plot was solid for Bird with the Crystal Plumage, but obviously Argento had a higher budget, he had better actors, he had better film crew, he had better cinematography, and that's what made this so much better than Plumage. The first thing that Morges and I noticed right out of the gate when watching this, within the first 5 minutes, was the camera angles and the overall cinematography compared to Plumage, compared to Suspiria, compared to Mother of Tears, compared to Inferno, compared to some of the other works that he and I have seen, albeit not at the same time, but before we ever met each other, which is actually funny because we met each other less than a year ago, and he's the only other movie buff that A, knows about Giallo films, and B, knows about Godfrey Ho films, but I digress. Anyway, so right out of the gate with the camera angles, it's a lot more smooth, it's a lot more steady, and he also did some interesting little tweaks and stuff. I mean, Whereas Plumage, there's a lot of camera jerking going back and forth. There was definitely a lot of experimentation. This was so much smoother. He probably had camera crews on tracks. He probably had maybe a rented wheelchair if he didn't steal one to do a much smoother for close and zoom in, zoom out. The coolest thing that I noticed, though, during the course of this film that we watched, which was about 96 minutes, I mean, you could burn through that pretty quickly, was a shot that was done from the killer's perspective. So it was a first-person POV. So all throughout the movie, you have these maybe 1-2 minute, maybe 30-second snippets, including the head bob. So I'm guessing the actor had a Steadicam on, of the shots from his perspective, which was really cool because it was, once again, a breakout concept, because I haven't actually seen that too much back in movies that were shot in the 60s and 70s and 80s. It just really wasn't done. But it gave you this perspective that you're seeing it from a whole new concept, as opposed to if you're just doing person A, person B, close up to person A, zoom out to person B, and whatnot. It was very well done, and I think this was kind of where Argento found his stride, which you'll later see in his later movies, such as the Three Mothers trilogy, once again Suspiria, Tenebrae, Mother of Tears, and so forth. Other real cool camera angles were there's shots of maybe somebody descending the stairs, one of the characters, the main character, and it's basically the cameraman's probably lying on his back looking up, and you see the entire staircase wound from bottom to top, and you just see the characters maybe walking down slowly. And maybe that seems a little bit abstract, but to me, it definitely was original, and particularly compared to modern movies where you're so focused on maybe a general pan or a wide shot or maybe an extreme close-up, to see an angle like that of somebody doing just one particular thing and it's a still frame definitely did the breakout to me, in my personal opinion. Second thing that really caught on, once again compared to Plumage, once again compared to Suspiria, is the overall color scheme. And I know that may seem like I'm really just picking at things, but here's the other thing too, is Argento is notorious for his color contrasts. You've seen it in Suspiria. You saw it in a couple of scenes in Crystal Plumage, but for this, it was a perfect shot of light versus dark, of polychromatic versus gray. You have characters wearing your traditional 1970s garb of maybe like a camel-colored blazer and a black turtleneck, but then you have a gray sidewalk, but they might be walking into a room that'll look like Jackson Pollock had a seizure. And to me personally, that kind of adds to the overall experience. It unnerved the hell out of me in some scenes, but it also kind of painted the overall concept, since most of Argento's movies are shot in Europe, particularly Italy. That just kind of gave the whole scheme of it. But once again, if you tie that color scheme of, say, maybe a very lavish apartment with cream and granite and black, and then maybe some very brightly colored statues, and you're seeing that through the first-person POV perspective, it just added on to the overall atmosphere, which is the next thing I want to talk about. The atmosphere, as I said, can make or break a movie. The overall feeling in this movie had me feeling tense and uneasy and unnerved from the first 5 minutes, when you just have two characters walking down the street in the dead of night, and compared with the music, which I'm going to get into, of course, in a minute, it just really had you feel tense. Like you don't know if they're going to be the first victims, you don't know if they're going to be the protagonists, you don't know if they're just bystanders, excuse me. It could go from a very nail-biting, kind of on the edge of your seat scene to a completely different scene for the aftermath, and you find out what happened to the characters or the victims, and then it cuts away to maybe a shot of the first-person POV of the killer, back to the main characters, and it just, the way it all meshed together, it barely gave you 2 minutes to catch your breath before the next plot point hits or the next plot twist. And just overall, it was I can't vouch for Morgues, because obviously he was watching it over in Germany and I'm watching it over in Florida. But I really I couldn't help but feel concerned for the characters. I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Even in the broad daylight, you still had this overall vibe of like, something gonna happen. What's about to happen next? And I'm gonna get into that in a second with like the titular and stereotypical giallo overall thing. And I know I'm trying to sound vague because I don't really want to give away too many spoilers. Next up is the music. Now, in Bird with the Crystal Plumage, as well as Cat O' Nine Tails, Argento used the famous composer Ennio Morricone. I'm probably killing his name, but that's beside the point. And obviously, Morges and I were, once again, not terribly impressed with the way Morricone did the soundtrack and the overall vibe towards Crystal Plumage. But for this one, oh my god! This was like Morricone suffered from night terrors after flipping through H.R. Giger's, Guide to Complete Suffering and Madness, if there's such a book exists, which it probably doesn't. Patent pending. And just had this overall creepy, not even a classical vibe. It was like a complete 180 from what if you've heard any of Morricone's works, you're probably familiar with more of the classic, easy listening, relaxing kind of vibe to it. But this one, it was unsettling, and it added to the atmosphere of the overall movie. I mean, even when you weren't going to a near-death experience or something that's going to lead to another plot twist, it still kind of had you just go, oh, yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if Argento listened to that, and that's what inspired him to hire Goblin, which is a fantastic European... I can't really call them... I don't really know what genre to call them, so I'm just going to kind of call them dark ambient, because I'm familiar with their works from the Three Mothers trilogy. Hired Goblin to do the Three Mothers soundtracks, or at least for Suspiria and Mother of Tears, because I haven't seen Tenebrae yet. And I'm pretty sure Goblin also did the soundtrack for Inferno. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. But just this overall unsettling kind of very slow build crescendo, starting very minimalistic, and then just building to this overall curtain of just sounds coming in from every which way, and coupled with the sound effects of maybe the characters walking down the street, or the killer running, or a character running for his life even, or the POV perspective. It just had this overall unsettling vibe. Like, even though I know it's a movie, I couldn't help but get just sucked into it. And that's what it comes down to at the end, is how does this immerse you? That is such a big thing to it. But I'm not done yet. Let's also talk about a little bit more of the immersion thing. The character development. There was character evolution from the start to the finish. And this was something that kind of had me concerned that you rarely see in a giallo film, that you don't really see, in my experience at least, for those movies. Suspiria had great character interaction and immersion right from the get-go. The rest of the giallo movies that Josh Wasabi, and I saw that as Blood and Black Lace, Black Belly the Tarantula, and God forbid, Lizard in the Woman's Skin, as well as some of the other movies I've seen, even Crystal Plumage, the character involvement was very static. There might be a relationship between maybe the main character and their significant other, maybe between a longtime business partner and one of the other characters, but everything else seemed very static, very drawn back, very just kind of like, whatever, I'm here for the paycheck, man. Don't ask me, I just work here. And you kind of see that a little bit in the beginning of this movie of Cat O' Nine Tails, but because it starts out, and this is not spoiler, I'm going to try and keep this as spoiler-free as possible. You meet the first character, which is a blind man and his niece. I forget their names. The niece called the uncle Cookie, and I forget her name. I think it was Lori, but correct me if I'm wrong, so we're just going to call her the niece. They're walking down the street, and it's obviously, since they're of relation, they are close. When the blind man, when Cookie, that feels really weird saying that, it almost sounds like a strip name. When the blind man, Arno, that was his last name, when Arno meets the news reporter who's the other protagonist, it starts out very aloof, very dismissive, kind of like, whatever, we're never going to see each other again. But the more they interact throughout the course of the movie, it's not only this, you need me to help you with your case, I need you because you know more about this than I do, or something like that. It becomes this business relationship of, quid pro, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, to mutual respect for each other. And by the end, there is genuine concern between the two characters. And then also later on, you have the reporter and what starts out as possibly just this another aloof, I don't care, static personality. But the more they get to know each other, the more they warm up to each other. And that's just like in real life. I mean, when I first meet somebody, of course you're going to be guarded about your feelings. You're going to be guarded about what you do, particularly if you're a news reporter or a police reporter or a police officer or a blind person or just a bystander. You're going to keep things close to the vest, but the more you get to know that person, the more you're going to open up to the more that you're going to want to help each other out. So that wasn't a first for Argento, but it definitely was not something I expected after watching Plumage and other giallo films by other directors. And also, this is just going to be something I touch briefly upon. Argento is usually known for a minimal of special effects or just effects in general when it comes to his movies. He lets the actions, he lets the overall atmosphere do the talking for him. And this movie did not disappoint. This movie is also very minimalist in the special effects. You get the fake blood every now and then, but once again, it's not a gore fest such as if you're watching an Eli Roth movie, or even if you're watching a David Cronenberg movie like Scanners or Videodrome. Sorry, Harkov. Harkov really likes the movie Videodrome, and actually I think that was a movie I introduced him to back in the days of the Nerd Cave. But Argento's minimalistic effect made it more believable, and I really, really enjoyed that. And that just added, once again, to the immersion, the overall unsettling feeling, because it was relatable. And before I go into my overall impression, I kind of want to talk about the standard giallo concept. From my experience, a giallo film will always throw between 2 or 3, not false motives, but things that could potentially be a reason for why the murderer, the killer, the perpetrator is doing what he or she is. And it always throws you off. Some of them are believable, some of them you're just kind of grasping at straws. Cat o' Nine Tails, like I said, most of the other giallo movies I've seen had a handful of possible motives and plot drivers for this film. But all of them, every single one of them, was just vague enough to make Mortguess and I scratch our heads and say, that could be it. That could be it. That could be it. I think there were close to half a dozen MacGuffins or motives that he and I both kind of drew on conclusions from. But when the final point and the reasoning for this happened, for the whole plot, was completely over our heads. It was something we didn't even think about because it was so subtly discussed in the beginning and throughout the course of this movie, but it just seemed kind of like, okay, whatever. But that's kind of what made me go, nothing Argento does is meant to be taken lightly or with a grain of salt. There's always a bit of substance to what he does throughout the movie. If it's a character involvement, which there were a couple of scenes where we just kind of maybe chalked it up, Borges pointed this out flawlessly. There was a scene between two characters, and once again, it was this interesting scene. We didn't think twice about it. What I guess actually chalked it up with was due to odd acting, his words. And at the closer to the end, when the whole thing was explained, he's like, "Wait a second. Now that makes sense." And thinking about that throughout the course of this day, when I'm just recapping the movie in general, is there were so many different things. There was one thing that could be relatable to point B, that could be related to point C, that doesn't relate to the overall plot, but might have been something between two characters that kind of just made it all sewn up nice and tight. And I loved that about this movie. So one final thing before I go into the overall impression of this movie is just a very, very slight plot overview. And I'm saying very slight because I know a lot of the times I go into the plot in detail, but much like with Kubo and the Two Strings back in the day and a few other movies, I really encourage you guys to go check this out. You can buy it on DVD, you can stream it on Amazon Prime. I think if you're actually a Prime member, you can actually watch it for free. So go out there and do it. Now, yes, I consider giallo films to be a horror subgenre, but this was more, like I said, tense and unsettling. It was like a cross between a tangible horror movie and a film noir or anything like that. As I said in my rambles about movie entry, it's based kind of like an Agatha Christie novel, for lack of a better description. But overall, it's about a blind man and his niece who kind of bear witness, kind of, to a murder at a genetics lab, and a reporter starts to investigate said murder and tries to analyze why it's going on about it. He ends up hooking up and rendezvousing with Arno the blind man, and they start investigating every single point from start to finish. And they actually had 9 different leads, which is why the movie is called Cat O' Nine Tails. As every Argento movie has, there's always some subtlety that goes back to the title that you will not find out at least until halfway through the movie. And just, once again, so many different motives. Like I said, there were 9 different motives that go through, but none of them related to the overall reason of why the murders are occurring until the very last 5 minutes of it, and I just love that so much. So, all in all, comparing it to Suspiria, which is, as I've said a million times before, one of my favorite movies, I can't compare it because Suspiria is a supernatural giallo horror movie. There are elements of ghosts and phantoms and witchcraft and supernatural kind of things, whereas Cat O' Nine Tails is all based in the real world. There is no supernatural element behind it. There is a little bit of science fiction going around stuff with the genetics lab, but you know what? You have to at least take some liberalities and some freedom with the overall plot just to keep things going a little bit. Just kind of tie some of the knots a little bit tighter. But the fact that this was very believable, from the killer to the motive to the character interaction to the overall feeling and vibe of it, I think I found this movie a little bit more unsettling than Suspiria, because this could actually happen. I know. There's always going to be some element of supernatural, and of course I believe a little bit in the supernatural and whatnot, mainly because, well, that's my own personal beliefs. I'm not going to go into that. And I'm sure things like that can be proven or disproven, but the fact this could happen in real life really made it more believable to me. And I think that's what sets this apart from Suspiria or The Three Mothers. Of course, I'm going to watch these movies again and again and again because I love them so much, but you got to be in the mood to watch Suspiria, and you got to be in the right mood to watch the Animals trilogy, i.e. Plumage, Cat O' Nine Tails, and the next one that Mordegas and I will be watching, Thor Flies in Grey Velvet. But that's just my opinion on this. If you like giallo movies, I highly encourage this. But here's the thing too. If you're going to watch an Argento giallo, don't start with Suspiria, don't start with Cat O' Nine Tails. Start with Plumage, because that sets a baseline, as I've said. Because otherwise, you're going to have this big hype for these other movies. Or even if you watch Mother of Tears or Tenebrae or Inferno or anything like that, it's just kind of like going back to his starting point and seeing his origin. So it's kind of, you see where he's come from, you see how he's kind of finding himself, he's kind of deciding what works and what doesn't, he's throwing stuff at the wall. But overall, this movie, oh my god, I'm actually going to buy it on DVD just so I can add it to my collection. And of course, if I'm going to get Four Flies in Grey Velvet regardless, because that rounds out the Animals trilogy. But that's just my thoughts on this movie. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take on it. But with that being said, once again, I've got another review coming up this weekend. It's not a giallo movie. It was actually based on a poll I posted on Twitter a couple of months ago, before I kind of took that month break from gaming and that 3-month break from movie reviews, which I'm both disgusted and excited to record because it's not been done very much, and I'm looking forward to hearing your opinion on that as well. But anywho, like I said, that being said, let me know what you think, and y'all have a wonderful evening, and I'll catch you on the flip side, alright? Peace.